The morning sun crawled lazily over the rooftops of Flagstaff, painting the sky in soft amber hues as Claire Dawson wrapped up her night shift at Flagstaff Urgent Care. The desert air was crisp, the streets still empty, and the clinic bathed in the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. Claire sat behind the intake desk, closing out reports with the mechanical precision of someone used to routine. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, but her mind was far from calm. Another patient had been turned away last night, a mother with a sick child, all because of the clinic's unwavering policy. No payment, no treatment. Claire had argued quietly, but as always, Sandra Klein had been quick to remind her of protocol. This place wasn't about healing, it was about invoices. Claire leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as Sandra stood near the front, scrolling on her phone, her lips pursed in that ever-present look of disapproval. The rulebook might as well have been tattooed on Sandra's forehead. Claire hated it. She hated the way this job slowly drained the humanity out of her. The end of the shift was minutes away when the front door slammed open with a violent gust of desert wind, dragging in dust and the sharp scent of pine. A man stumbled inside, barefoot, clothes torn and caked with dirt. His shirt clung to his side, soaked in dark blood, and his arms trembled as if every step cost him what little strength he had left. He swayed, trying to hold onto the wall, but collapsed into the nearest chair. His face was sunken, eyes wild and unfocused, skin as pale as sand. Claire shot to her feet. Sandra reacted first, not with concern but with that clipped, automatic line Claire had heard 100 times before. "Sir, we'll need payment up front before we can admit you." The man didn't respond. His head lolled to the side, a ragged gasp escaping his lips. Claire's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. For a brief second she froze, the weight of the rules pressing down on her like chains. Then instinct won. Without waiting for Sandra's protest, Claire rushed to him, dropping to her knees and checking his pulse. It was faint, erratic, and his skin clammy with sweat. There was no time. She glanced at Sandra, who was already reaching for the phone, her face hard as stone. "I'm calling Trent," Sandra said coldly, stepping toward the counter. Claire didn't waste a second. She hoisted the man's arm over her shoulder and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the back room. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, but didn't resist. Sandra shouted something behind her, but Claire blocked it out. In the sterile light of the procedure room, Claire laid him gently on the exam table. His side was torn open by a deep gash, likely from something sharp, maybe a branch, maybe worse. She cleaned the wound swiftly, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. As she pulled his sleeve up to place the her eyes caught something odd. On the inside of his forearm, half hidden under grime, was a tattoo, a crowned eagle with entwined initials beneath it. The ink was old, faint in places but unmistakably intricate. Claire's gaze lingered for a moment before she forced herself to focus. Whoever he was, this man wasn't some random drifter. He stirred, his cracked lips parting. His voice, a broken whisper, barely made it to her ears. "They're coming, no trust." Claire leaned closer, but his head dropped back, eyes fluttering shut as unconsciousness claimed him. The air in the room thickened. Claire moved fast. She finished dressing his wound, started a fluid line, and wrapped a blanket around him. But instead of alerting the staff, she glanced toward the hallway. Sandra was standing by the front desk, phone pressed to her ear, voice lowered. Claire couldn't make out the words, but Sandra's sharp glances toward the back told her enough. Claire's mind flashed back to last evening, the silhouette of a black SUV parked off the highway near the woods, headlights off, engine running. She hadn't thought much of it then. Now, unease prickled down her spine. Moving quickly, Claire wheeled the man into the supply closet at the end of the hallway, covering him with spare linens. She double-checked his breathing before stepping out, locking the door softly behind her. Sandra hung up the phone as Claire passed, eyes narrowing into thin slits. Claire said nothing, keeping her expression neutral, but inside her pulse roared. She had just crossed a line, one she wasn't sure she could ever come back from. The morning pressed on with a suffocating stillness inside the clinic. Claire moved between patient rooms, keeping her head down, her mind racing with the choice she'd made only hours ago. The man in the supply closet remained unconscious under the layers of linens she had used to hide him, and each passing minute felt like a countdown to the inevitable. She told herself she'd figure it out, get him stable, wait until the shift ended, and somehow sneak him out unnoticed. But Claire wasn't fooling anyone, least of all herself. She was checking vitals on a patient when a voice sliced through the hallway like a whip. "Dr. Mason Trent." His sharp, clipped tone echoed from the back corridor. Claire froze. A second later, Trent's footsteps stormed past her, and instinctively she followed. The door to the supply closet hung ajar. Claire's heart sank into her stomach. Trent stood over the bundled man, who was barely visible beneath the sheets, his face ghostly pale. The doctor's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into cold slits as he pulled the blanket back, revealing the four Claire had set. "What is this?" Trent hissed, not even looking at her. His voice dropped, low but loaded with fury. Claire tried to speak, to explain, but he spun on her so fast she took a step back. "What have you done, Dawson?" Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. Trent stared at her as if she were a stranger, like all the years she'd worked beside him meant nothing. His face, normally composed in clinical detachment, now twisted in something close to rage. "This clinic has protocols. You don't break them. You don't play hero." His voice was sharp enough to slice air. "You hid a patient in a supply closet. Without payment. Without authorization." Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. She thought of the man's whispered words, of the black SUV in the woods, of the strange tattoo on his arm. None of it made sense. All she had done was help someone in need. But it didn't seem to matter. Dr. Trent gave a humorless laugh before shaking his head. "You think this is about some bleeding heart nonsense? You think this is about policy?" He stepped closer. His voice dropped to a dangerous low. "We had orders." Claire blinked, stunned. "Orders? What did that even mean?" Before she could ask, Sandra appeared in the doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression wasn't the usual look of petty office disdain. This time her eyes were different, sharp, knowing. "I warned you," Sandra said quietly, her tone almost pitying. "You really have no idea what you've stepped into." Trent gave her one last glare. "You're done here, Dawson. Effective immediately. Clear out your things." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. Claire didn't argue. There was no point. Trent turned on his heel and marched out, barking something about a containment call into his phone. Sandra lingered by the door a moment longer, studying Claire with that unnerving look. Then, without another word, she walked away. By the time Claire collected her things and left the building, the weight of it all had sunk in. She wasn't just out of a job, she was marked. The decision she'd made, the line she'd crossed, felt irreversible. And for what? A stranger who might not even live through the night. The air outside felt thicker, heavier than the clear Arizona morning should have allowed. Claire walked toward her old sedan, gripping her bag tightly. Her eyes flicked across the parking lot, and froze. The black SUV sat parked along the curb in front of the clinic, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. The same vehicle she'd seen near the woods the night before. The same shape, the same quiet hum of the engine. A chill raced across her skin. Claire got into her car without looking back. She drove home in silence, every thought tangled in regret, fear, and an unsettling sense of having stepped into something far bigger than she understood. By the time evening settled over Flagstaff, Claire sat in her cramped living room, staring blankly at the muted television screen. The news flickered images of a corporate conference. Logos, sponsors, and keynote speakers. For a moment, something familiar caught her eye. A crest on the corner of the banner. A crowned eagle entwined with initials. Her blood turned to ice. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed on the table. A message. No number. Just a blank contact. She picked it up, her heart pounding as she read the words. "They know about you." Claire's hand trembled. Somewhere in her gut she knew. She hadn't just saved a life. She'd stepped into a shadow she couldn't begin to understand. The desert night wrapped around Claire's cabin like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The wind whispered through the pines outside, brushing against the thin glass of her windows with a sound too soft to notice on any other evening. But tonight, every noise felt magnified. Claire sat curled in an old armchair by the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the dying embers, though her mind wasn't on the fire. The text she'd received hours earlier still burned in her memory, its simple words replaying over and over. "They know about you." She had tried to push it aside, telling herself it was a prank, a cruel joke by Sandra, maybe even Trent trying to scare her. But deep down she didn't believe that. The sinking feeling in her stomach wouldn't let her. It was nearing midnight when the quiet was broken. Not by the wind. Not by the trees. By engines. The low, measured hum of vehicles moving slowly over gravel crawled up her spine. Claire stood, the air in the room thinning as headlights sliced through the darkness outside. Two black SUVs rolled silently onto the dirt drive leading up to her cabin. They parked in unison, angled toward her front door like predators closing in on prey. Claire's pulse surged. Her eyes darted to the back door, her mind racing through every possible escape, every plan that dissolved before it could form. She could hear the car doors opening in synchronized movements, the muted thud of boots against gravel. A knock echoed through the cabin, sharp, deliberate, and too polite to be harmless. Claire pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. Shadows shifted outside the thin curtains as three men in dark suits positioned themselves on her porch, their postures rigid, their faces expressionless. One of them spoke, voice low, controlled. "We're here for the package." The word struck her like a slap. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her breath caught halfway in her throat, refusing to rise. For a heartbeat, the men stood there in silence. And then a second vehicle door opened, not with urgency but with a strange, practiced calm. From the shadows between the SUVs stepped a figure Claire didn't expect. A man in a tailored dark suit, his movements slow, measured. Unlike the others, his face wasn't hard or cold. It was thoughtful, almost wary. He stopped a few feet from the porch, hands loosely at his sides. His eyes met hers through the narrow glass pane of the door. He didn't speak right away. The men on the porch stepped back, a synchronized retreat that seemed more rehearsed than natural. Claire gripped the doorknob, her knuckles white, her heart drumming against her ribs. The man gave her a nod, slight, almost courteous. "I believe we need to talk." His voice wasn't what she expected. Calm, measured, free of threat. She didn't open the door, but she didn't move away either. Her mind scrambled for recognition. His face wasn't familiar, not exactly, but there was something about him that tugged at her memory. A news headline. A missing person report. A billionaire investor vanished during a private retreat. She'd seen his photo on the news less than a week ago. Garrett Holmes. The man she had pulled into the clinic. The stranger with the tattoo. Claire's stomach turned cold. Garrett gestured subtly toward the men beside him. His voice dropped just enough for her to hear. "Stand down." Without hesitation, the suited men stepped back toward the vehicles. The sharp sound of their boots fading into the night. Claire's grip on the doorknob didn't loosen. Garrett waited until they were far enough away before stepping closer to the door, but not too close. His hands remained visible, a silent gesture of no harm. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank me?" The words bounced inside Claire's mind, absurd and terrifying all at once. He wasn't a lost hiker. He wasn't some random man from the woods. And yet here he was, standing outside her home with an entourage that looked like it belonged to a head of state. Claire's eyes flicked toward the men waiting near the SUVs. She caught a whisper between them. "Mr. Holmes is cleared now." Her throat tightened. Garrett's gaze didn't shift. He studied her with a sharp, assessing calm, not like a man grateful for a rescue but like someone carefully watching for a threat. Like someone weighing every word, every move. For the first time, Claire wondered if he wasn't here just for gratitude. And if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't sure yet whether she was a friend, or something far more dangerous. The Arizona sun had barely cleared the horizon when Claire heard the sound of gravel crunching under tires again. This time, there were no black SUVs swarming her property, no silent men in dark suits crowding her porch. Just one sleek sedan parked at the edge of her dirt driveway. The early light reflected off its polished surface as Garrett Holmes stepped out, followed closely by a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. They moved without hurry, a stark contrast to the tension of the night before. Garrett approached with the same composed demeanor, his expression unreadable. Claire watched from her porch, arms folded tightly against her chest. Part of her wanted to turn around, bolt the door, and pretend none of this was happening. But she stayed rooted to the spot, the weight of unanswered questions anchoring her in place. Garrett stopped a few feet from her, giving a slight nod that was almost respectful. The man beside him remained silent, his posture professional, the briefcase held like a formal extension of his arm. "I wanted to speak with you in the daylight," Garrett said, his voice calm, stripped of the intensity it carried the night before. He gestured slightly toward the man with him. "This is Thomas. My legal advisor." Claire said nothing, her gaze shifting between them. Garrett continued, his tone measured. "I owe you more than gratitude. I owe you the truth." He didn't wait for an invitation. Instead, he began explaining, each word deliberate, his voice steady. The clinic where Claire had worked, Flagstaff Urgent Care, wasn't just a for-profit operation with aggressive billing policies. It was part of a quiet acquisition chain, a corporate network masked behind local ownership. Garrett described it as a web of medical facilities bought under shell companies, slowly absorbing independent practices across Arizona and neighboring states. On the surface they were ordinary clinics. Behind closed doors, they were leveraged assets. Tools in a game of corporate takeovers and financial manipulation. Claire listened, a cold knot tightening in her chest as pieces of past conversations slipped into place. The odd comments from Sandra about new owners, the abrupt change in clinic policies months ago, the sudden arrival of expensive equipment with no explanation. Claire had thought it was just corporate greed. She hadn't realized it was something far darker. Garrett paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. He explained how his own company, Holmes Holdings, had been circling that same network. But not to buy it, to dismantle it. He discovered through his legal teams that this network was being used as a front for laundering money from illegal overseas operations. The more he pushed for investigations, the more resistance he met. And then came the threats. The manufactured scandals. The attempts on his life. The last one, the hiking accident, wasn't an accident at all. Garrett had been targeted during a private retreat in the mountains, forced off the grid, left for dead. Claire's clinic had been part of the setup, whether Sandra and Trent knew the full scope or not. They were supposed to detain him long enough for others to move in. Claire's intervention hadn't just saved his life, it had blown apart months of carefully laid plans by people who thrived on control and silence. "You didn't just save me," Garrett said, his gaze steady. "You derailed everything they had set in motion." Claire felt the air thicken around her. She remembered Sandra's words now, like a whisper threading back through her memory. New owners. Big changes. Don't ask questions. Garrett finally opened the folder Thomas had been carrying. Inside wasn't a settlement offer or a confidentiality agreement. It was a proposal. The creation of a new foundation, the Horizon Medical Trust. A non-profit network of community clinics dedicated to providing care without financial barriers, funded independently from the corporate medical chains that had poisoned the system. Garrett wasn't offering Claire a job. He was offering her a partnership. She stared at the papers, the words blurring together for a moment. It felt surreal, impossible. She was a nurse, not a business partner. Not a leader. The thought of stepping into something this massive felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. Fear battled with something else inside her, something that had been quietly burning for years. The desire to change the system from within. To make care about people again. Garrett wasn't pressuring her. He simply waited, letting her sit with the choice. Claire swallowed hard, torn between the instinct to run and the realization that this might be the moment she had been waiting for without even knowing it. The chance to stop being a small piece in someone else's game. The chance to start building something that mattered. The following weeks passed in a blur of unanswered questions and sleepless nights. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger had been moving beneath the surface of her life all along. The morning Garrett left that folder on her kitchen table, everything shifted. She knew she couldn't accept his offer blindly. She needed to understand the truth for herself. What started as cautious curiosity soon became a quiet obsession. Claire began digging. She reached out to former colleagues, combed through old financial reports, and even searched public business records late into the night. On paper, Flagstaff Urgent Care looked like any other privately owned clinic. But the deeper Claire searched, the more cracks began to appear. The ownership structure was a maze of shell corporations, each registered in different states, many under names that traced back to addresses with no real businesses. Most curious of all, every holding company tied in some way to a name Claire had seen before, Virex Holdings, the same corporate sponsor shown during that news report weeks ago, the one with the crowned eagle crest. It didn't take long for her to realize that Virex wasn't a health group at all. It was a multinational holding used as a front for corporate acquisitions, often hostile, often aggressive. The deeper Claire dug, the clearer it became. Virex had been buying out small clinics under the radar, restructuring them, and using their financial systems to launder massive sums of money. Flagstaff Urgent Care was just another link in the chain, a local pawn in a global operation. But it wasn't just about money. Claire uncovered internal memos buried in old email servers, forwarded anonymously from a source she never identified. One thread made her stop cold. A series of messages between Dr. Mason Trent and a Virex executive discussing an asset containment protocol. The asset wasn't medical equipment. It was Garrett Holmes. They planned to hold him at the clinic, long enough for a partner acquisition team to move in. The wording was vague, corporate in tone, but the meaning was clear enough. The clinic Claire had once believed was a lifeline for the community had been turned into a trap. Sandra had been right. Claire really had no idea what she'd stepped into that night. Claire compiled everything, financial records, emails, ownership trails. With Thomas and Garrett's legal team behind her, they presented the evidence to the FBI. She sat in on closed-door meetings in Phoenix, watched as federal agents took copies of the documents, and listened as investigators confirmed that Virex was already under surveillance for financial crimes and corporate espionage. Claire wasn't a nurse anymore. She wasn't even just a partner in Garrett's venture. She had become a key witness in dismantling a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Flagstaff. It felt strange, surreal to stand on the other side of it, not as a victim but as someone who had helped take the system down. Weeks later, standing in front of a building that once housed a chain convenience store, Claire looked up at the freshly painted sign, Horizon Medical Trust, Flagstaff Community Clinic. The grand opening was simple. No media circus, no fanfare. Just people, families, seniors, single mothers, waiting for a chance to walk through the doors without fear of being turned away for lack of insurance or money. Garrett stood beside her as the first patients entered. He didn't say much, just gave her a quiet nod of approval. Claire returned the gesture. They both knew this wasn't just about one clinic. It was about changing how things worked, starting with this place, this town. Claire felt the weight of it then, the strange, twisting path that had led her here. A man stumbling into her clinic. A decision made in a heartbeat. The fallout that nearly broke her life. And now this. A new beginning built not on power or profit, but on something far rarer. Trust. Compassion. Integrity. She hadn't simply saved Garrett Holmes from bleeding out on a clinic floor. She had helped shatter a global corruption network piece by piece. Now, as she watched a young mother step into the clinic with her child, no wallet in hand, no insurance card offered, Claire understood the real impact of that single morning when she'd crossed a line she wasn't supposed to. She hadn't destroyed her life. She'd redefined it. Claire Dawson wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was the woman who rewrote the rules. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Subscribe to the channel, like us, and be sure to write in the comments what you think of this story. Don't forget to click on the bell, so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.